Hi, and welcome to Tactical Theology. Today we're going over a TikTok video by a man named, I'll just call him Collins. I don't know what his real name is, but the title of the video is How to Humble Christians Regarding Jesus' Resurrection. So he makes several points throughout this video, and we're going to go through them together. So let's get right into it.
Here are some easy counters to humble Christians when it comes to the resurrection of Jesus. First one is easy. Just ask them, what is your evidence? They will be forced to answer the Bible, and then you just ask, what is the evidence that the Bible is true? And at that point, they will just either not answer the question, blatantly lie, or just be quiet.
So his first advice to skeptics and atheists is to ask the Christian, what is your evidence, right? What is your evidence that Jesus actually resurrected? And the Christian will say, the Bible. And so that's when the atheist says, well, what is your evidence that the Bible is true? And apparently the Christian will either lie, not answer the question, or just stay silent. Now, we actually have really good evidence to support our claims. In fact, you don't even need the Bible to evidence the claim that Jesus resurrected. You can use completely non-biblical sources, but he specifically mentioned the Bible, so that's all we're going to talk about right now. But the Bible does suffice our historical needs. Just some characteristics of the Bible is that the Gospels were written from 40 to 90 AD. That is 10 to 60 years after Jesus. And that makes these super early historical sources. And we have really good evidence to believe that these super early historical sources were written by eyewitnesses or by people who had access to eyewitnesses. So these are primary source documents written as contemporaries to Jesus. Now, these Gospels were also written as historical narratives. If you compare and contrast these Gospel stories, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if you compare and contrast those with first century mythologies, then you'll see there's a huge difference as to how these were written. The Gospels were obviously written to convey historical events. And they don't match up at all with first century mythology. Now, a note about the Bible and the resurrection. To evidence Jesus's resurrection, we don't need the Bible to be inerrant, right? Now, us as Christians, we do believe that the Bible is inerrant. We do believe that the Bible has no errors in it. But in order to make the case from the Bible that Jesus resurrected, the Bible just needs to be at least historically reliable, right? Skeptics and atheistic scholars such as Bart Ehrman will say that the New Testament is at least somewhat reliable, and so we can draw conclusions of history from it. We can get historical information from the Gospels because they are at least somewhat historically reliable. We also have extra biblical writings such as the Gospel of Peter, the writings of Justin Martyr, and the early church fathers, and they all say that Jesus was resurrected. And those are all extra biblical sources. Now, us as Christians, to answer or to talk about his last point about Christians either lying or not being able to answer or just staying silent or whatever, we as Christians need to be ready with evidence to support our claims so that we can answer these objections when they arise. If you've studied apologetics at all, you will know the passage that I'm about to go to. It is 1 Peter 3:15. I'll put that on the screen for you. First Peter 3:15. I'm actually going to start in verse 13. Now who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled. But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. We should always be ready to give a defense for what we believe. And we need to do it in gentleness and respect with a heart that is in the right place, right? That means that when you are talking with someone, giving evidence for uh, your beliefs, you shouldn't assume that the skeptic you're talking to is automatically lying because they disagree with you. We need to give them the grace that my man Collins over here isn't giving us.
Next one is, but 500 people saw Jesus after he rose. Whoa, slow down, buddy. That is a claim that was made by Paul 20 to 25 years after Jesus supposedly rose. And if you really want to hammer this down, you can just ask them this. If 500 atheists came to you and told you, we were just taken to the moon by aliens in an alien spaceship, we built 6 mansions, and then we were taken back to Earth, does that make the claim more believable? No.
Okay, so this last point that he made, he said 500 people saw Jesus, right? That is the claim of Paul. And apparently this claim was made by Paul 20 to 25 years after Jesus, right? So in order to talk about this, we actually need to go to the passage that he's talking about, because he's talking about 1 Corinthians 15. And I'm just going to read this for you because TikTok videos are usually short. And so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He didn't have time to read it. So I'll read it for you. It says, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time." That's what Collins was talking about. "Most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles." In verse 8, he says, "Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me." 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 7 reflects a very early creed, right? Paul is writing this to the Corinthian church, who he visited. I think it was his first missionary journey. And this part of his letter to them reflects a creed that is super early. And we know that it's an early creed. Well, first, I'll tell you what a creed is. A creed is a series of statements that a community of believers uses to portray their the most crucial parts of their faith, right? The critical beliefs that they have. And we know that this is an early creed because it's got creedal rhythm, right? The words that are used in certain places, and the use of Aramaic in some of this. And Paul said in verse 3, "I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received." So this is a technical term for the transmitting of some kind of oral tradition. Paul had already given this oral tradition to them. Now he's given it to them again in writing. Now, Paul says that he got this tradition from somewhere. And that means that he got it from someone else. Well, he likely got it when he visited Jerusalem about AD 35, and he hung out with Peter and James. This was right after he converted to Christianity. and Peter and James were training him in the faith, and they most likely gave him this critical series of statements about Jesus. And that means that this puts this creed within 2 years of Jesus's resurrection. So Paul wrote it down in First Corinthians, which was written about 20 to 25 years later. But the tradition that he is citing here dates to about within 2 years of Jesus's resurrection. But some scholars actually say that this creed was formed a lot earlier, because it needed time to be spread around and all this stuff. So some dated to within months of Jesus's crucifixion and resurrection. So within this creedal statement, Paul adds in some extra stuff as well, saying that he knows who some of these people, some of these 500 are, right? Because he says some of them are still alive and some of them are dead, right? Well, how could he know that if he didn't know who they were, right? Now, my man Collins here conveniently left out the parts where Paul names specific people who Jesus appeared to, right? Collins focuses on the 500 who nobody knows who they are, right? There are no names, there's no other sources, none of that. But he leaves out the names of the specific names of the people that Paul mentions, right? He says that Jesus appeared to Cephas, or who was Peter, appeared to James, who was the brother of Jesus, all the 12 of the apostles. And the people would have known who the apostles were because they were with Jesus and they're prominent at this point. And Jesus also appeared to himself, right? Now, we know that Peter, James, and Paul all died as martyrs, right? And that is evidence that they truly believed in what they were teaching. Maybe you've heard the statement, people will not die for what they know to be a lie. That brings us to the alien illustration, right? So, the illustration that Collins uses is if 500 atheists were abducted by aliens and they go and they build mansions and then they come back to Earth and they tell you, hey, we were abducted by aliens, we went to outer space, we built mansions, and they brought us back. Would you believe them? Well, this analogy has several problems with it. Can they produce any other evidence that they were abducted by aliens and they built these mansions and then they were brought back? Do they have any other evidence at all? Because when we say that Jesus resurrected, we have evidence of Jesus's existence. We have historical evidence validating the Gospels. We have extra biblical sources confirming biblical events and biblical characters, right? Like Pilate. And we have traditions of non-Christians affirming the empty tomb, right? So, do these atheists have any evidence outside of their circle that they were abducted, right? Any pieces of the spaceships, or maybe a screw or a nail from these mansions that they supposedly made? Or if we were to if we were to question each one individually, would they all tell us the same story like we have in the Gospels? Now, there's more, but all that to say that the differences between the alien analogy and the Gospels, the differences are just too much for this to have any meaning. Let's continue.
This last one is my favorite. But the tomb was empty. This doesn't even require more than 2% of brain power. What's more likely? Someone stole the body in order to fabricate this story of a man rising from the dead, or God sent a version of himself to earth so he could sacrifice himself to free us from the curse that he put onto us. All right, enjoy humbling Christians.
All right, and that's the last piece of evidence that he has for you. Basically what he said is, when the Christian says that the tomb is empty, this, by the way, is his favorite argument, so I'm glad that he brought it up. He asks, what is more likely? That someone stole the body to fabricate the story of Jesus being resurrected, or that God sent himself to sacrifice himself to free us from the curse that he put onto us? I'm going to talk really quick about the theology here in a second, but this is a false dichotomy, right? The two things that he's talking about don't relate to the same issue. He says that we're talking about the resurrection of Jesus. What is more likely? That someone stole the body to fabricate the story, or that God died for himself? One is talking about the theology of like Jesus dying on the cross, and the other one is what happened to the body, right? That the part about God sacrificing himself to himself has nothing to do with the argument that he's trying to present here, right? So I'll just talk really quickly about the theology, and then I'll kind of tweak his argument a little bit. It is a complete misrepresentation of historic Christianity. God did not sacrifice himself to himself. Jesus voluntarily gave himself up to be sacrificed on behalf of us, right? This is a complete misrepresentation of the Christian theology of the Trinity, right? Where God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, they are distinct. They're one being, but they are distinct persons. And Collins doesn't seem to understand that. And Jesus died to free us from the curse of sin, which we put on ourselves, right? He didn't come to to free us from the curse that God put on us. We put the curse of sin on ourselves, and Jesus is the solution to that. He offers a way out. So don't worry about the theology that Collins is trying to give you here. Now he asks, what is more likely? Like I said, I'm going to tweak his argument a little bit. I think what he's trying to get at is what's more likely, that someone stole the body or that Jesus rose from the dead? Okay. So he seems to agree that the tomb was empty, right? He's not arguing that the tomb was never empty. Jesus' body's still in there. He's not making that argument. So I'm not going to give any evidence for whether the tomb was actually empty, because that's not the point right now. So his assertion is that the robber theory is more reasonable, right? That someone, I'm assuming he is mentioning the disciples, because that's the general belief about this particular theory, that the disciples stole the body of Jesus and they went around telling everybody, hey, Jesus rose from the dead. Well, my first point is, what is your evidence for that? Right? You're asking us for evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. You must have some good evidence of this theory that you're positing, right? If you're saying that it's more reasonable, I would like to see some evidence for this. Now, the robber theory itself has a lot of issues in and of itself, to the point where it's not really advocated for all that much anymore. Just a few problems is the guard, the guards at the tomb, right? How are a few fishermen supposed to go and defeat soldiers with weapons and armor and roll away the big heavy rock and pull out the body of Jesus? Um, and especially since these disciples were extremely scared after the death of their uh, their rabbi, right, their teacher. They were afraid that the Jews would come after them now because they followed Jesus during his years of ministry. And now they're hiding in the closet. But when we look at the lives of the apostles, something happened to where they go from scared and hiding in the closet to going out and publicly proclaiming the resurrection of Jesus. Something in there had to happen. Um, and that leads us back into they would not die for what they know to be a lie. Um, Now, what did they get from this? If they stole the body of Jesus and they started telling everybody, "Hey, Jesus rose from the dead," what that I'm not even going to talk about all the post-resurrection appearances that we have evidence for. But what would they gain from doing this? Well, they actually gained quite a few things. They were tortured, they were hated, they were poor, right? Um, and some of them were killed. And it was all for laughs and giggles, right? We're going to go and steal the body of Jesus and we're going to pull the wool over people's eyes. And it's going to be so funny, right? When we ask, what did they gain from it? Well, they didn't gain power. They didn't gain money or riches or fame or glory. They didn't gain women, right? There is no motive for them to be doing this. So, based on all the evidence that we have and the evidence of the disciples, the most reasonable, the most likely scenario is that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, here are some key takeaways from all of this. For the skeptic, these are really poor arguments, and they're made in bad faith, right? Us Christians are willing, or more than willing, to have conversations with you about the evidence of the resurrection. But the purpose shouldn't be to humble Christians or to win an argument. The purpose should be, let's get at what's true. Let's test the evidence that Christians have as to why they believe these things, right? We shouldn't, this goes for Christians too, we shouldn't be going into an argument trying to best the other person or um, to win an argument. The purpose is to let's figure out what's true, and whatever is true, that is what we need to believe. And for the, like I said, that goes for the Christian too, but more specifically for the Christian, you need to be prepared with evidence as to why you believe Christianity is true. Don't be like that first person that Collins talked about. And, well, what is your evidence for Christianity? Well, I believe in the Bible. Why do you believe in the Bible? And you don't have any evidence for it, right? Or maybe you just say, "Oh, I just have faith. I have faith that it's true." Having faith doesn't make the Bible true. The Bible is true whether or not you believe in it. So we need to have evidence. We need to be able to articulately explain why the Bible is true, why we believe Jesus rose from the dead. If you are a true Christian, your faith is going to be public. You are not going to live your faith privately. If you're a true Christian, it's going to be public because you want people to know about Jesus and that you're a Christian. And when you are public, your faith is going to be tested. And you need to be ready to defend your beliefs in the face of these tests. This is Tactical Theology, and Lord willing, I'll see you on the next one. God bless.